Hi, I'm Yegi. I'm an entrepreneur and success coach who wants it all. Family, luxury, career, and the freedom to do whatever I want, whenever I want. And I'll do whatever it takes to get there. I created the Yegi Project to document my journey and inspire others to do the same. My mission is to change the world by influencing and leading others to do what they love and live fulfilled lives. Welcome back to the Yegi Project. Today's honored guest is Aracely Vidales, who is a therapist, a mindset coach, and a well-rounded woman who supports the Hispanic community to overcome all sorts of hardships and live the life that they want to live. Now, without further ado, I'm going to let her introduce herself and tell us, please, Aracely, who are you and what do you do?
So I'm a trauma therapist. That is my main, where I get my bread and butter from is being a trauma therapist that focuses on the Hispanic community, primarily like the first generation. First gens is what we call ourselves, whose parents migrated to the United States and we're either the first generation living here or being born here. I also work with kind of helping people shift their mindset in terms of like really looking at our patterns of thinking, our values, things, the mindset that gets passed on generationally speaking. And I like to focus on like how are we kind of getting in our own way through our mindset and how can we
which is so common for anybody. I had to go through that too, because there's some things we think like this is the way it is and this is how I am until we realize, oh no, it doesn't have to be that way. I can do something about it. But unless somebody makes you aware of it, and that is why we're talking about it on the podcast today. And I'm so excited to discuss that with you. We just kind of get stuck, like you said, through generation and generation of the same way of thinking.
Yes, even though, for example, maybe like the first generation, right? It's here, there's a lot of learning. We're helping out our parents a lot, navigating these like two cultures, not quite fitting in this one or that one. So we're kind of somewhere in the middle, creating our own, our own little like bubble. So, what I see that happens a lot is that even though the first generation maybe like they get a little bit better, the second generation is a little bit more better. However, the mindset is the same. The mindset doesn't shift. So, things like if we come from poverty, if our parents come from poverty, there's that scarcity mindset or like that, what I like to call like the poverty wound or the money wound. And our parents don't always know, like, let's change our mindset to where we're at now. And
because a lot of times, when they migrate to a whole new country, they're figuring out how to put food on the table. That's not their priority. They just want to survive. And I can relate to that. I actually wasn't born here myself. Still maybe am I considered first generation or my kids are considered first generation?
Well, you might be first generation here, there's different kinds, there's first generations, like you're the first one that's kind of navigating those two cultures. With the speaking of the language, you're speaking more than one language, right? And your kids, if you weren't born here, maybe your kids are the first generation born here, but technically the second generation in this country.
I see. Yeah, depends how you look at it. But either way, the struggles of that, I mean, I fully get it. And it has been really hard to navigate. But I also do think I had to put in a lot of work on myself and also to make those mindset shifts in order to be where I am today. I am grateful for it. I feel like it has shaped me into the person I am, made me strong, made me kind of be a go-getter and somebody who figures out a way no matter what. So I'm grateful for it. I'm curious how my kids are going to be with their personality because they have it much easier than I had it. So all of that is something to consider. So sometimes, I've learned to be so grateful for all the problems I've had and I've overcome because it has made me who I am. I want to discuss in this podcast for people who are in that kind of moment, yes, of the way they haven't figured out, okay, what do I do? How do I get past this hurdle of feeling kind of like lost? I don't belong. Like my parents have a total different way of looking at things. I
Mhm.
have a different way of thinking about things. Like who's right? Nobody's wrong. Like how do we get along, right?
Right, yeah. And it's not really about like choosing one or the other. Sometimes we feel like we have to choose one culture over the other, but
Mm.
it really isn't about that. You end up forming like your own, whatever your culture looks like. It's a combination. I know for me, it's a combination of some of our traditions and then some of the new traditions that we celebrate in this country, right? It's a mix of the
Yes,
two. It's not really
definitely.
choosing. But sometimes we feel like we have to stay loyal to one or the other. When I feel like no, it's not necessarily that simple, you know?
Yes, no, it's not. I've learned that, you know what? Life's not that serious. Just do what feels right and good to you. But
Mhm.
again, navigating through that as a young adult when your parents still have a lot of influence on you. I mean, even today, I have my own
Mhm.
whole family, and my parents still try to have certain influence on certain areas. It's just how I feel like some of the older cultures are. And a lot of people I talk to in different cultures can relate to that. And it gets tricky because the people you cherish, like your parents, they do have influence on you, even if you may not
Mhm.
agree, right? So it's a matter of
Mhm.
kind of like, okay, this is my stance, this is my beliefs. I'm going to take them into consideration, but I'm going to try to kind of live life on my own terms. And I know you help
Mhm.
people get there.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? How about for your clients or for you, what has
Mhm.
been some common challenges and how do you advise people to try to overcome them when they're going through that transition?
Yeah, so I think a big part of it is finding your people, finding your community. I do believe that, especially from a Hispanic background, I'm Mexican American. So for me, I think for my community, family is huge. Like it's a huge part
Mm-hmm.
of our culture, right? We're very much collectivistic. So, and then you look at more of the American culture, which is like more individualistic, which is this is where
Yeah.
we bump into some issues because it's like, wait, what about family? But and then it's like, wait, what about me? I want to do my own thing and find my own way.
Yes, it is
However,
really a struggle. It really is. Like I had somebody close to me in my family who was
mm,
really battling with that. She grew up here and, she wanted to find herself and build her own life and happiness, but she felt so guilty that she wasn't doing what her
right,
parents wanted or what they approved, but she was doing nothing wrong. But in her
your parents,
in like in her parents view, it's like, oh, you're abandoning us or you're just you're a bad person, but she was not
yes,
doing anything wrong.
no, no, yeah. So I call that like the first gen guilt,
Mm,
because I think there is a lot of guilt attached, especially to that first generation here that is really trying to like find out who they are, between, their, country of origin versus, where they are now. And, sometimes certain, I know I can speak only for myself, and even for my clients, their parents tend to be a lot more conservative versus here in the United States, we have dances, we have things, all these things growing up going to school that, to like, for example, my parents only, my mom has a sixth grade education, my dad has a third grade education. And they didn't have these things. They didn't have dances. They didn't have the things that we had growing up. You know, there's part of it is like the unknown of like, okay, I don't know if these new things are safe, like going to a dance,
mm-hmm.
right? Like that was a
Yeah.
big deal because you wouldn't do that. At least for my parents, like you have to like ask for permission and you had to have a chaperone. And I'm not
Right.
lying to you. I had a chaperone for when I was like 15 with like my first boyfriend. That I actually told my parents, like I had a chaperone that my mom would chaperone us to the movies. It was the most awkward thing.
I fully understand. My parents were also very strict. I didn't dare even try to have a boyfriend until I was 18, and I was still
Yeah,
feeling like after high school, and I was still
right?
feeling like scared about it. Not scared,
Uh-huh.
but it was still awkward until
Right.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's tricky to navigate, definitely, but we do need to stand up for ourselves in certain situations because
Mhm.
as young adults too, like you said, we do need to kind of find our own way. And it is tricky, it
Mhm.
is hard, it can be traumatizing. So what advice would you give to our listeners today who are kind of in that spot where they want to find themselves, but they also want to please their parents? And then for the parents that are listening, what advice would you give them to kind of feel safe
Yeah.
enough to give their kids or, teenagers, young
Right.
adults space for them to figure out who they are?
Right. So, I think like a really important thing is I would say it's better to know where your kids are than to not know, or, in excess is going to be good, right? So if you're too strict, that's not going to be good. If you're not strict enough, that's not going to be good. You want to have some like balance in the middle, where at least your kids feel heard or feel like they can talk to you, feel that, they're not afraid that you're going to get scolded if they come up to you and ask you,
Mhm.
or tell you I have a boyfriend or I have a girlfriend or I want to go to a dance. You want to have them, you want to let them feel comfortable and asking you those questions, because if not, they're still going to do it. You're just not going to know
Yeah,
about it,
true.
right?
Exactly. And if they're in an unsafe situation, at least, they can come to you if they feel like you're going to be there for them instead of being upset and judging them.
Yeah, and I would say have a conversation, an open dialogue, and I think that's something that's hard to have, especially being like the first gen here. And if your parents tell you something and you say something bad, even if it's something bad, it's considered talking back, right? Like it's like, like you're talking back just by it doesn't matter what you say, you're talking back. So, a lot of the times we learn to just kind of like, okay, I'm just gonna stay quiet, not say anything because there's no point to it. So what happens is that
Mm.
we are not teaching our kids to have different conversations, a skill that is very necessary
Oh,
later on in
wow.
life when they grow up, right? A lot of the times I know I grew up where like what I say goes and that's it. And wouldn't talk about that. That's it. It was like that's all. But what the
Yeah.
skill that
Definitely.
I felt that I was missing growing up was learning how to talk about difficult things, learn
Yeah,
how to
and a
like
lot of
be
people actually
assertive.
do have that problem of,
Mhm.
sticking up for themselves, even as adults in professional environments or speaking
Mhm.
up and trying to say what they want. Even in relationships, people
Right.
have that. In romantic or friendship
Mhm.
relationships, they have those issues. And I never thought about it like that because like you said, we've been conditioned, or certain of us have been conditioned to just
Mhm.
be like, okay, fine, it is how it is. I'm just gonna
Yeah.
accept that. It doesn't matter how I feel. If I
Right.
feel upset, if I feel unfair, whatever I feel, it doesn't matter. I just need to go with it, right?
Right. Yeah. So exactly what you said. People, parents, we don't realize that is what we're not teaching our kids when we are not allowing our kids to have a dialogue back and forth. We might take it as being disrespectful,
Mm,
and we might, these things might come up for us. And that's, as the parents, that's our stuff. That's not our kids' stuff,
of
That's
course.
our things that we need to work through, right? Because it's exactly what you said. Whatever happened in the home, right? If let's say you didn't have that dialogue, because a lot of the times where you can't talk back, then it transfers over to later on when you have, a boss that perhaps they're not being fair. Well, we won't have those difficult conversations or stand up for ourselves because we've learned, or we've been, like you said, conditioned into like that authoritative figures we do not challenge.
I see.
Even though that's not necessarily what we're told as children and teenagers, that is what we're picking up.
Of
And so
course.
that's how it gets in the way later on in our life. And we don't realize it. We
Yeah.
don't realize
So
it.
this is where, like you said, the things being passed down generationally. So let's and I know there's a lot of common ones that get
Mhm.
passed down in from I don't know. I guess not only culturally, but even just generational differences, how
Mhm.
things like evolve. What are some other common ones? So we talked about one that's, we're afraid to speak up. So that's should be like a
Right.
skill we want to write down. We're going to work
Yeah.
on that on ourselves
Yeah.
when we're trying to
Yeah.
shift our mindset. What are the next two top things that we can work on
Yeah.
as adults once we realize, oh, I may have this limiting belief?
Right. So the other one that I think is huge is the imposter syndrome. You know,
Okay.
I think, and if you don't know what imposter syndrome, it's like a feeling of like I don't belong, even though let's say you have all these accolades, all these accomplishments, you have the titles, the degree, but you just feel like, I don't belong or I'm not good enough. It's always this like I'm not enough, right? Compared to others.
How does that become about? Like I said, from a parent's point of view, how do we make sure we try as good as best as we can to avoid doing that to our kids? And
Yeah.
if we are in that condition, what can we do to try to, I guess, look past imposter syndrome?
So I have this belief that reconnecting with your roots is a huge key point in being able to overcome imposter syndrome. A lot of the times we try to fit into these boxes that maybe don't feel right, or because they may not understand the particulars of being in between these two cultures, right? For people of color, it might look different. It might not look like it would for another person. So part of that to me is instead of like trying to fit into this box that you're being told, like you have to do X, Y, and Z in order to achieve your goal, right?
I
You
see.
have to follow like this cookie cutter pattern. However, a lot of the times part of that also includes like not necessarily taking in your culture and how does that fit into this mold that they're trying to society or whoever's trying to make you fit into, right? To me, I think that if you reclaim your roots and you're proud of your roots, you know your history. And when I say you know your history, I'm saying like the history of your family, your ancestors, you know. I think that that is very important and very empowering to know and
Mm,
to battle that imposter syndrome. Because if you know where you come from, if you know your roots, you understand your roots, you understand the complexity of just being either a person of color or coming to a different country. That is very empowering because if you know where you come from, you're gonna know where you're going.
I
And
see.
when we don't know where we're coming from, we're just kind of. I feel like we're just kind of floating around, trying to find our way and see what works and what doesn't. Whereas I feel like if you're empowered and you reconnect with your roots, you know where you come from, you're proud of where you come from, and that gives you that like that what is it called? Like being proud of yourself, being
I see.
proud of your ancestors, that they have sacrificed so that you can be here, so that you can be in the space that you're in. So I say that you are doing your ancestors and your lineage an honor by being in these spaces, where we're talking about these topics, where we're having these conversations, something that they probably weren't able to do, you know? So to me,
Yeah.
reclaiming your roots, it's not just being also rooted and grounded, but it's also a source of pride and a source of, it's not something to hide, but rather occupies that space.
Celebrate it. Yeah.
Yeah, to honor your ancestors, to honor their sacrifices, and anybody that came before you. You know,
Yeah.
I think that that's a huge thing to
If it
help.
wasn't for them, we wouldn't be here. All right, so I'm gonna jump ship, and I want to talk a little bit about relate common relationship issues because that's also something that really
Mhm.
holds people back in their success. Now, although this is more of a business development podcast, we also focus on personal development, and we've
Mhm.
discovered that relationships are key in order for
Mhm.
us to be successful. Right? We need to have
Yeah.
healthy, happy relationships, which will make make us feel happy in order for us to focus on our careers and success. So
Yeah.
with that said, I'd love to discuss with you and pick
Mhm.
your therapist's brain about these.
Yeah.
I know they are common issues. I have friends, family, even
Mhm.
myself in the past have had these concerns and questions. So I want to see what you think and we can discuss it. I'll give you my 2 cents as well from
Yeah.
my experience. But the first one would be is our communication problems, right? So a lot of
Mhm.
relationships still do have, and it could be a romantic relationship, it could be a parent kid
Right.
relationship, it could be, best friend relationship. So I think it can apply to any of it. We can talk about mainly your partner relationship because I think that's the key one that you're with all the time.
Yeah.
If you're in a marriage or a partnership or
Partnership.
living with someone, roommate even, right? You have to have a good
Yeah.
relationship with that person. But so the first question is, why does my partner shut me down when we try to talk about issues?
So, that is a very complicated question.
Let's talk about it. I think
Why does
yeah, I think
well, I'm
it's really
wondering,
good because
I'm
sometimes it
wondering,
makes no sense, right? Because if you
is your partner, what's it called? Is your partner narcissistic? Like, what scenario are we in?
no, 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 nothing
Or is it particular for that
nothing
scene?
extreme. We can keep it
Yeah.
general, but
Yeah.
just like as humans, we shut down, right? I've been guilty of
Right.
certain things too, and I've even caught my parents even shutting down with certain like things that I ask them, even as like grown adults.
Right.
So why
Yeah.
do we shut down when we're faced with issues instead of trying to talk
Talk
through
about
it
it.
and try to figure it out with our partner?
You wouldn't think that a question like that would be so complicated. I think as a therapist, because we think of it in so many different layers,
I
that,
see.
when someone says that, I'm thinking, okay, how did this, like, let's say, how did person A
So
do
how
this?
do I try to figure it out? Let's say I'm your
Yeah.
client and I'm asking you
Yeah.
this about my partner. So how do I try to
Mhm.
figure out why my specific partner is pretty much ignoring the issues
Right.
or shutting down when I ask him
Yeah.
certain
So
things?
so I'm gonna wonder, one thing to take into account is how was the communication growing up for them
I
versus you? Because sometimes we have families where they are very expressive, they get loud, right? And that's just how they grew up. They don't have a problem, speaking their mind. And then there's others that grow up where you don't talk about it. You just kind of sweep everything under the rug and just pretend it never happened and it
And
went
this is
away.
again kind of like how we were raised. Is that where it starts?
Yeah, yeah. What examples did you see? Imagine if you have a one person who grew up in a household where they're able to, get loud and argue, and it's not seen as a bad thing necessarily. And then let's say you have the other person, the other partner who comes from a home where it's not really safe to speak your mind. Maybe, if there was like, emotional abuse, or, it wasn't necessarily like something that was practiced, like actually speaking your mind, you know, they will internalize and keep everything and then not bring it up until they explode. And
I
then you have like a conflict right there, right? Because it's like one person's like, why aren't you telling me? Why do you explode? Why don't you tell me before you explode? And the other one is not realizing that part of the reason is because that's not how they communicated. They didn't learn to communicate that way,
So do you
you
think
know?
it's important to like literally sit down with your partner and figure out what your communication kind of styles are?
Yeah.
I don't think
Mhm.
that's really something your ex
People don't
gets
do
to talk
that.
about when you're dating, right? You know,
No,
communication style. Like, let's
no.
make sure we're gonna get along. You just
Yeah.
assume like if you're attracted, you have same
Right, you
interest.
figure it out. Yeah. Yeah, you think that you figure it out, you're gonna figure it out, right? Because it's not like our parents are saying, have these conversations, before you
Yeah.
get serious with the person.
And
But
it's
I
so
would,
important too, though. Like it really, really is. It can really make or break your life. If you don't have a
yeah,
good relationship, you're not going to be
yeah,
successful in
yeah.
any other area. Like I
Well,
know a lot of people that they just don't feel like doing things just because they're unhappy in their relationship.
right, right. And I think people don't realize that, one person might take it personal when it really isn't. You know what I mean? Like it really
I
isn't
love that
personal.
you pointed that out. Please talk about that because we do. Like, we always think, okay,
Yeah.
what did I do wrong? Why doesn't he or she want to talk to me
Yeah.
about this? Like, am I approaching it wrong? We always take it upon
Right.
ourselves.
Hmm.
But like you said, how do we kind of steer away from that? That it's,
Right.
how do we look at it from their point of view and not just
Right.
feel like
Right.
it's our fault?
Right. So we have to stop and not always take it personal and rather like kind of be curious, Like don't fall into that right away, like I must have did something wrong. Or, we start creating these scenarios in our head that aren't true. And then we react to them like if they're true when they're not. This is why it's important to talk about, what was communication like for you when you were growing up, you know? Because and we really do view the world with a different set. I like to say with a different set of goggles. Like everybody has a different set of goggles. And it might be the same exact scenario, but you're going to have two very different versions
Yeah.
depending on how that person views the world. You know,
That's why
we're
when two separate people say it, the same exact story, if they were at the same exact place, it might sound totally different.
different, right? Because through their own experiences, right? Whatever they've seen, whatever they've lived through, it doesn't have to be bad, you know. But those are the goggles or the glasses that they're looking at the world, their life through, So imagine if someone, let's say, has a significant amount of trauma, right? And let's say it's trauma that they haven't worked through or processed, right? So maybe something that might be insignificant to the partner, something like, I don't know, let's say maybe they like slam the door and into them, it's not a big deal. And maybe to this person, because they grew up in a household where maybe there was like substance abuse or domestic violence, something simple like that is going to be triggering. So now
Oh,
you have a
yeah.
person that's going to be reactive, thinking, making something of that. Like maybe they just closed it without intending it to slam, but
See,
in their
yeah.
mind is like they're angry, they're slamming doors. So now you have someone that's going to be reactive, and what was nothing necessarily meant to be a big deal not turns into a big deal.
Oh,
And one
wow.
person has no clue as to why it got so intense, while the other ones is like, the other person is going to be like, well,
Yeah.
WTF,
So
like,
it's
what?
important to also know our own triggers to really like figure out
Right,
why we react to things. I think that's a good indicator. It's like, whoa, like, why did I just get so heated? Because sometimes certain things actually do make me heated, and it's certain things my kids do, not necessarily like my partner. But
right,
and then I'm like, why did that just really get to me? But then I don't
right,
have time to sit down and analyze it or figure it out.
right.
But I think maybe that's a good indicator of like, okay, hold on. Like this feels like it just made me really heated, almost like pushing a button. Like, why
Right, and
did that happen?
that's what I say. If you feel like a button was pushed, stop at some
Mm,
point and sit with it and ask why did that get me so worked up? Like what was it about
exercise.
that? What was it about that that made me like feel that way? You know? Because then what happens is now you got two people triggering each other back and forth, back and forth, back and forth.
No,
You
but
know?
well, then it could really just be like a not big deal where they can work through it and live happily. But instead,
Right.
like as an
Yeah.
outsider, you could see that. But to them, it just is such a big deal. But it's not really anybody's fault. They just need to work through their
Right.
own
Their own trauma.
issues. Yeah.
And also being patient with one another when those triggers. That's why it's important to talk about like what are each other's triggers, just so that you also know, the more you know about your
Yeah, so you
partner.
can kind of like approach it in a more gentle way if you know that like triggers your partner until they can work through it. Oh, it'd be so nice if everybody had time to literally sit down and communicate properly, right?
Yeah,
We're
but
so
you don't even
periodically.
you don't even have to like necessarily like sit down and do it in that moment. You could also just kind of put a time in it, right?
Mhm.
You could just be like, let me
That'd
just,
be a good practice. Honestly, that'd be a good practice to add on your calendar. I mean, I would love to do that. Just, monthly check in and be like, okay, what were the things that we really need to go back to and figure out instead of just kind of suppressing or putting aside. And then one day I know
right.
it's going to come up again. Let's
Yeah, it's gonna
resolve
come
it.
out. That was the next thing I was gonna say. Eventually, it will come up. Like if it doesn't get resolved, it's gonna continue to come up until it does. So you want to put like a mental note, like, okay, that made me feel some type of way. If you don't have time to process it, you can come back to it later. This is where like journaling or keeping like a quick note on your phone might be helpful. I'm in the
Mhm.
habit, obviously, I'm a therapist, but yeah, it's that
But it'll
alone
be
in
so
itself.
helpful if everybody can like slowly build these habits as kind of like a regular way of life, right? That's kind of part of my purpose. Is like I want people to live happily because the world would be in such a better place if everybody was happy and they genuinely
Yeah.
focus on what matters to them and fulfill their purpose or their love for things instead of
Mhm.
just being miserable and arguing and fighting and being
Right.
angry with one another. So I think it's
Yeah.
so important to have these conversations, make people aware, plant the seed of giving people some ideas of, okay, maybe I've been
Mhm.
in a marriage for 5, 10, 15 years and now we're just kind of, I don't know,
You get
floating.
used to another.
Yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, whatever. But maybe we should start a practice of monthly check-ins or bi-weekly check-ins.
I will say that if you are married, you should continue to date one another.
Yeah, that's
Because that's the
nice.
that's the first thing that goes away is the dating. And then if you throw in kids in the mix, you know, studies show studies show that kids do not make a marriage happier. It does the opposite.
Yeah.
That's what research shows. Just
It's
because it's very
really
tough.
funny how people think, or like that's what we were told too, like in the past, like maybe my parents or grandparents' generation, you have to have a kid to have a family or to keep the family together, or that's the next thing to get fulfilled and be happy. But now after I had kids, I'm like, that sounds really wrong. It sounds opposite. Like it becomes
Yeah,
way more challenging if you don't have a great relationship with your husband
yeah.
or partner or whatever. No way bringing in a kid is going to make things better. It's just going
No,
to make things
no.
like 10 times
You
worse.
you would be surprised how often I have that conversation with like not necessarily with couples, but maybe I'll have one person be in therapy and they're talking about, maybe, potentially having kids in the near future. So one of the things I ask is how's your relationship?
Yeah.
Because whatever it is now, you bring a child into the mix,
It's going to be magnified.
magnify that times 10.
Yeah.
Magnify that times 10 because that's what children are going to bring out. Whatever mess we haven't like worked through
Yeah.
either as individuals or as a couple. You know,
Children and money, those are the two things that are very like they're magnifiers. If things are good, they're gonna be good. If they're bad, they're gonna get worse. So you
yeah.
just need to make sure you have everything else
And,
figured out so those
and
two big things don't affect your life and
right.
relationship.
Or you can work through it, right?
Yeah,
Like we're gonna hit
exactly.
bumps. We're gonna hit bumps on the road and that's normal. That's life, right? However, a difficulty in your marriage or with your partner doesn't necessarily have to depending on the severity of the issue, right? It can either make your relationship or break your relationship. Challenges in a relationship can also bring you very much together, just as it
Yeah,
can like kind of break you apart, right? So this is
you're right.
where having good hygiene, that's what I'm saying, hygiene within your relationship is important. Doing the things like, checking in. What are my triggers? Why am I feeling that type of way, right? And being clear and direct, no assumptions. I do not care how like simple or like common sense. That's the other thing. But it's common sense. Well, everybody's common sense is different.
Yes,
That
it's
my
not
common sense
common.
is not going to be the same as yours. It's not going to be the same as my partner. And we assume, well, it's common sense, but it's common sense to who?
Yeah.
And so I don't care how ridiculous it might feel. It's better to talk about it than to assume. Don't assume that your partner's gonna know because they
Yes,
might not.
that's one thing I've learned too, like when I was first like starting to date and really figure out who I am, what I like, what I don't
Mhm.
like. wait, I can't just assume this person's like me and they're going to know. Like, unless I say exactly what I want, they're
Mhm.
not going to do it. But if I do say exactly what I want and I don't get it, then maybe I need to try to figure something else
Yeah.
out. But that's the first step, right? Like, you need to
Mhm.
ask for you to get what you want.
Right. Yeah. And sometimes we feel like, well, I shouldn't have to, or okay,
Yeah,
it's
it
like,
is.
yeah, like, would you rather like
I
just say
know.
I shouldn't have to, and then you're gonna be continue to be upset if the person doesn't know, and they continue to
Yeah.
do the same thing over and over. At that point, that's not your partner's fault. That is gonna be your own fault. You're getting in your own way because you're not the one that's being open about your needs, even if they seem so like basic and simple.
Simple, yeah. Like one common one too, and I keep hearing is, oh, well, I don't feel like my partner appreciates me, or I feel neglected, like they don't show they care, they're not planning dates, they're not doing
Mhm.
X, Y, and Z, right? And then they kind of shut down too because they're like, well, if they're
Mhm.
not going to put in effort, I'm not going to put in effort. I don't care. I'm going to, go out with my friends and do this and
Yeah.
that. So it gets kind of tricky if you feel
Yeah.
like you're not appreciated, and it's like a negative rabbit hole that just gets worse
Right.
and worse. What advice would you give that person who feels kind of neglected or ignored in a household or a family or a relationship?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, communicate your needs, right? And the other thing is, I'm gonna ask, like, were they doing these things before? Because if it's something that they never did, even when you were dating, then is the expectation realistic?
It's your fault. You committed to that person. I'm just kidding.
No, no, hold on, I'm gonna get some water. And not like that, but I will say that like it's just that sometimes we fall in love with the potential of a person.
Oh, okay. That's
We
kind
fall we fall for the potential and not what's in front of you,
of. Mm,
and this is where a lot of people get in trouble because then they end up feeling, let down, disillusioned because it's not what they thought it was going to be. And when
I
I say believe a person's actions, behavior, they might be saying something, but if their words and their behavior don't match, red flag, huge red flag,
see.
huge red flag. You
I
know,
see.
they could
Honestly,
have a lot
like
of
you don't think
potential.
about that, but maybe subconsciously, maybe you're attracted to the person or like
Mhm.
they're fun, but there's X, Y, and Z missing. And you're like, oh, it's fine. We can work on that.
Mhm.
It's trainable. I've heard people, use those terms. And I never thought about it like from the beginning. As you become
Right.
older, you think and you have a little bit more life experience, you think more about these things. But it'd be nice to know for the listeners who are just dating to kind of like, okay, really pay attention. Like, don't be delusional.
Pay.
Like, who is this person in the current moment? That's how they're
Mhm.
pretty much gonna be. Don't hope
Right.
and wish like that they're gonna change. And you either
Yeah.
accept it and
Or you
love
don't.
it, or you
Yeah.
don't, and it's not right for you if you can't live with it.
Yeah, because I will say I have met with a lot of people that really, it was the potential and it wasn't really from what
I
we have.
never even thought about it that way.
Yeah.
I didn't think that as humans we kind of do that, but looking back or thinking about it, I could see
Mm-hmm.
how we do that. We see the potential,
Hmm.
and I actually would make that mistake a lot with
Hmm.
employees because I'm a positive person and I'm a good teacher and trainer. So like like sure I'll hire you,
Hmm.
like I'll train you, I'll give all my energy and effort to you, teach you everything I know. And then sure enough, they weren't a good fit. Like they should
Hmm.
just be how they are from the beginning. And naturally I'm a teacher, like I'm a
Hmm.
coach. So it was
Yeah.
hard for me to be like, oh no, this person's lacking being timely, for example, a simple
Right.
skill. I'm like, it's okay, like I can work on it with them. But
Yeah.
I learned the hard way, for business is business, like trying to help and coach people is totally different.
It's
So when I was
different. Yeah.
hiring employees, I was like, okay, I just need to find the right people who are ready. Like I can't just get somebody off the street and be like, okay, I'm gonna mold you, right? So it's the same
Right.
concept.
Yeah, because you might not even have the time. And the other thing too is that not everybody deserves access to the entirety
Yeah,
of you,
that's the
right?
sad
Like,
truth. Yeah.
you get to decide who will have access to you and who won't, and how much of that, right? How much of that of you, do they deserve like access to you? And But yeah, we don't think about these things, but they're very, very important to red flags, especially if you're like thinking, if you're like just in your, especially if you're like in your early days, not really looking to settle down, it might not be as important. However,
Hmm.
if you're a person who's looking to settle down and be in something serious, then yes, these are things you want to look into. You wanna who am I falling for? Am I falling for the potential or am I falling for what's in front of me? You
I
know?
see.
And don't then say, like, let's say in the future you end up like getting married or moving in with this person, you know, again, are you accepting the person for who they are in that moment, or are you still hoping that they're going to change? Because if you're
Yeah.
still hoping they're going to change, it's probably most likely that they won't, you know?
Yeah.
Especially if they're older and kind of set in their ways already, you have to be realistic too about the expectations. And that's the other piece that a lot of the times we get let down because our expectations are actually not realistic to that person and what they're able to offer or give. That's not
Yeah.
saying that like you should settle for less. However, there is a reality that not everybody is gonna, be at the same level or want the same things, or,
Yeah, they
there's
just
gonna
may
be
not be the
differences.
right fit for you. It's nothing personal to anybody, right? I believe everybody has like their person out there, even in
Hmm.
regular friendships. Like not everybody gets along. You just have to find the right people for you to be in your circle
Hmm.
in any way, right? And if you don't get
Right.
along, like it's nobody's fault. They're just not the right fit for you.
Yeah, yeah, and that's fine. It doesn't always have to be like a good versus bad. It's like
Yes,
you
I
say,
love that
sometimes
you
it
mentioned
could
that.
sometimes it could just be like you said, we're just not a good fit, or we're just not a good match, or we
Yeah.
want different things, and that's it. It doesn't have to be personal.
Yes. Okay. So I just realized we're running short on time. So let me ask you the last final questions. Maybe we could do a part two if people want to hear more about relationships because we didn't even get to the
Yeah,
common career questions or issues
yeah,
for people to like feel fulfilled. I'd love to
yeah.
discuss that in the future. But for our listeners out there, I like to close with maybe the top three lessons that you've learned in life and the top three lessons you've learned in business and what advice you would give to the listeners today so they don't make those same mistakes.
Top three things I've learned in life and business. I would say I have learned, or I would say this one's both for life and business, is to let go. I learned to let go, and
Well, that could be a hard one, but
it is
okay.
very hard. Yeah, I learned to let go and like kind of flow with whatever the universe is, bringing you or planning for you. Sometimes we try to hold on to things that no longer serve us.
Mm,
And this could be friendships, this could be business partners. I mean, this could be anything, right?
yeah.
But when we hold on to things that no longer serve us, or maybe they serve their purpose already, and we don't want to let go, well, then we're not letting other opportunities or doors, to open. We're not allowing that abundance to come in and flow because we're holding
Wow.
on to something that like it's done, like its purpose is done. We need to let it go and move on,
Yeah, and
so
that
that,
could be really challenging to do. I could see that happening, but okay, I love that. So learn to let
yeah,
go.
learn to
What's
let go.
the second one?
The other thing is like, don't, and it's gonna sound like so basic, but don't sweat the small stuff, you know I have an autistic child, so it's my first child is, my oldest is autistic, and they have showed me big time. Like they have taught me so much patience. They have humbled me.
Wow.
But I think the biggest lesson is that, taught me to really truly appreciate the little wins, I would say, in
Yeah.
life and in business, the little wins. And also like not waste my time with things that like don't matter. Like I'm not gonna, get into a power struggle with my kid over like clothes. Like,
I see. Yeah, and
okay,
it's
like,
sometimes so challenging.
yeah,
I've learned and I'm still working on that too with not the power struggle, but I don't know what the right term is, but yes, to just let certain things be. Like
yeah.
the
Hmm.
other day, honestly, we were in Six Flags and my daughter really wanted to eat the cookies before she wanted to eat the meal. And at first I was like, no, 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 you have to eat your meal first. And I was like, you know what? We're out, whatever. Like
We're
just
having
have
a good day.
Yeah, she literally just picked like a couple M&Ms off of the cookie and then she ate her meal. I was like, look, like this was fine. Like, why was I so
Yeah.
stressed that she's not gonna eat her meal, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
tricky, but you're right. Like when you put things in perspective and there's so much more serious issues in life and people that deal with on the daily basis, then you learn, you're like, okay, you know what? This is not that important. Let me just let it flow instead of
Flow.
like trying to force something to happen.
Yeah. So that's a huge one. That's a daily thing that we practice. And both, like I said, in business and in personal life. The other thing that I think was huge was to create create my own definition of what success looks like for me. You
That's
know?
huge. That's huge.
Yeah. So,
Because we get
from
so influenced, right? Because like on media, everywhere is like, oh, you have to be a millionaire. You have to have a nice
yeah,
car. You have to have these nice clothes. You have to own a
right.
boat, like all these things. And we think, okay,
Yeah.
well, that's what success is. But no,
Yeah, or
but
you have to get up at 5 in the morning and then take cold plunges. No, thank you.
boy,
No, thank you.
I fell
No,
for
thank
that
you.
one. Though I bought a cold plunge, but then I got pregnant again, so I haven't been doing it.
Yeah, I just
But yeah,
I've never
you're right. It's too much. It's too much pressure to just try to
yeah,
like figure out what the world wants you to be for you to feel successful compared to you shutting it all out and like looking within.
yeah, looking at you get to define what success looks like. For me, I was very career oriented for
Hmm.
I would say most of my life until I got well, pretty much till I had kids, which I had my first one when I was, and then, having kids just like puts things into perspective,
It
right?
does, yeah.
And you want to have more of a balance, like where your time goes starts to matter even more, you know?
Mhm.
I think a big lesson for me was to define what success looks like for me, not what like society says success looks like. Like get a house with the white picket fence and be a be this climb up the corporate ladder.
Yeah.
That has never been, I think, my idea of success. However, I would try to like do that. However, it wasn't authentic to me. So
Yeah.
my
So
idea,
when did you realize, okay, hold on. Like, yes, it's great to want to climb up, to have X amount of like money or this and that. When did you realize, hold on, let me like define it for myself. And what does that look like to you today?
you know what? I would say I realized that when I was getting sick from all the stress of trying to be there for everybody, myself, my kids, and I was working. I had a government job at the time, so I was trying to balance so many things, being a new parent, and then I had two under two, so the pressure was really bad at that time
Mhm.
where like something had to give, and it was during the pandemic too. So basically, I felt like I was like pushed to the edge in terms of stress, where I was getting sick. Nobody was happy. I wasn't
Yeah.
happy with myself because I wasn't putting my family in my I wasn't putting my family first where and I was putting work first. And
Nice.
that just didn't align with me anymore, you know? So
Yeah, and
that's
it's
when I
it's really
realized,
hard. It's really hard because a lot of times too, you think you're working for your kids until you realize, hold on, I'm barely spending any time for my
right,
kids. Like, what? Something's got to give. I got to figure something
yeah,
else out. Like, my kids just want me and my quality time. They don't care
right.
if we have a nice car. They really don't,
No,
especially
they
when they're
don't.
young. They just want
No.
to be there with you.
Yeah. So, it got to the point where I was like, okay, what is scarier? you
Mm.
know, keep going this way, burnt out, not being happy, my family getting the leftovers, or, you know, quitting, going solo, figuring it out as you go, but you get to say where your time goes, you
Yeah,
know?
that's
And
scary.
so it's scarier. That's why I always say pick your scary. Which
Yeah,
is scarier, you know? Pick your scary. Which one's going to be scarier? So for me, it was scarier to keep going how I was going.
I see.
To me, that was scarier. So I had to really stop and think about like, reevaluate what I thought my life was going to look like in terms of like employment, in terms of myself as a woman, as a mother, as a female, you know, as a partner. I had to like take a step back and really look into like what are my values now? What are my goals now? Because I am not the same person I
Yeah,
was,
I had
you
to
know?
do that too, actually. Like you, I was very career oriented,
Mhm.
very driven until I had the kids, and I was like, hold on, my priorities just shifted. I gotta figure
Mhm.
out who I am again in this new
Right.
version because I still want to do a lot, but I
Mhm.
don't want to like sacrifice my personal life for it anymore because it means
Right.
a lot to me now, especially
Yeah.
when they're young. Maybe I could get back to there when they're fully independent doing their own thing. But right now, it was challenging to kind of like
Right.
re-find yourself. And I realized that we kind of have to do that periodically. We finally think we have things figured out, and then like,
Yeah.
whoop, life throws something at
No,
you. If
no.
it's a
Yeah.
relationship, if it's a kid, if it's
Yeah.
trauma, like something
Yeah.
traumatizing that happens in life,
Yeah.
unexpected, I don't know. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
very, very interesting.
Depending on where you're at in your life and what milestones, you know, are like in where you're at, that's gonna have a big impact, you know. But yeah, you know, that's what led to me really having to like, what is, you know, what does success look like for me? You know, because right now, this isn't success. This isn't working for me. On the
Mhm.
outside, you could say, oh, well, you have a government job, it's stable, you know, you're not out in the fields, you know, working so hard, but I'm not with my kids. I'm gone 10 hours a day. That's not a
I
life,
see. Yeah.
you know? And so when I did that, I felt like I was, you know, yeah, it was scary, but you know what? I felt more aligned, and then my kids were happier, my husband and I were on better terms. And now what do I define success? I define success as having a balanced life, having the flexibility to do what I want when I want. That is success. It's not becoming a millionaire. It's not like having
Yeah.
the fancy cars, you know, that's not success for me anymore. For me,
Yeah.
success is having that autonomy of being able to decide what my schedule looks like, you know? That's flexibility, balance, peace, health. That is what success is for me,
I
you know?
love that so much. Well, since we are getting ready to close this episode, can you tell our listeners your last words of encouragement and where can they find you to connect with you?
Okay, last words of encouragement.
I feel like this last questions were very
Right?
encouraging as
Yeah.
your last words of encouragement. So feel free to
Yeah.
summarize
You
one of
know,
it in a sentence.
what I would say is, you know, and something to what you said is like periodically having to reevaluate where you're at, right? And I find that without even thinking, I find myself doing that. It just so happens to be that it just goes along with like every quarter by accident, by coincidence. But you know, I think that that is something that we should all do, kind of like stop and think and reevaluate. Where am I at? What's working and what isn't working? Is there things that I need to maybe shift or tweak or let go of? You know what I mean? I think that's really important to keep yourself in balance, to truly live an authentic life. And I would say also like, don't be afraid. If there's something that you wanted to do, it's gonna be scary, but it's scarier to not have tried.
Yeah,
It's,
I love that.
you know, it's scarier to say, well, I don't know because I never gave it a chance. To
Yeah,
me, that's scarier. But giving something a chance, even if it doesn't work out how we wanted it to, I still think that's a success in itself.
it
You know, so
really
don't
is.
limit
It does
yourself.
at least, yeah, it at least will build a kind of stepping stone for you to know, okay, if this didn't work out, what's going to be next, right? We build some
Right.
skills along the way. If it's something that didn't work out, we can call it a failure or a learning experience on to the
Yeah.
next.
Yeah, and you know what? I don't use failure because like I feel like failure to me is like when you can't no longer like even try.
Oh, like
You
it's
know,
the end
like
point. Yeah,
it's
no,
the end.
praise that. I don't use failure as that. It's like if something just didn't work out, if it
Right? Yeah,
failed, it's a learning experience
it's a
on to the
learning
next thing.
experience, and maybe it's a path that is that was necessary in order for you to hit your next goal.
I love that.
And we
Okay.
don't think about that. Maybe that pivot was necessary.
I
It was a
love that.
necessary lesson because, like you said, it's a stepping stone to something bigger or something
Hmm.
better. So
Yeah.
don't limit yourself. Don't limit yourself because you think what ifs. No. Don't get stuck in that. You'd be surprised. I quit my job with no backup plan. I was lucky enough that my husband was very supportive. I didn't know anything about business. I just learned everything as I went. It was very scary. I made mistakes, but you know what? I will never I don't regret any of it. I can tell you right now, this is probably the best I've been in my entire life because I'm living
Right.
an authentic and an aligned life, and a balanced life.
Yeah. You can
Society,
genuinely, you're
yeah,
happy with your life. And I love that.
yeah, yeah. Society's not going to tell you to live a balanced life. You have to carve that out for yourself.
It is, and it's going to be unique for yourself. Well,
Mhm.
again, thank you, Araceli. Please let
Thank
our
you.
followers know where can they hear you. Oh, where they can hear you. I mean, where can they find you? Uh,
Yeah, so you can follow me on Instagram at it's my first and my last name and my title, so it's Araceli dot L. Well, that's my handle for the Instagram account. So it's Araceli.
and we'll link that or show that on the screen and below
Yeah,
so you guys can find her easily. Again, thank you so, so much. It's been so
thank
nice
you.
talking to you about all of this. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. And until next week, have a great one.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening. Please rate and review this podcast. Follow and engage with us on social media under the Yegi Project. And if you're interested in being a guest, email info@theyegiproject.com. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes.